You might have seen some news about Madagascar recently. You might have not. In any case, this is a recap and an update on the situation here in Madagascar from my point of view as a more or less average Madagascar person. I'm not a reporter. I'm not gonna be able to go into exact details and chronology, but hopefully I will give you a somewhat relatable account as a person who lives in this country and has seen some of what was happening here. The short of it is protests about the lack of electricity and water escalated, ended up in popular uprising, ousting the president. But there is so much to unpack here. So, since this is arguably the biggest development in recent Malagasy history, and to better paint the picture, give you better context, I will start my account 16 years ago, in 2009. Andradville was the mayor of the capital. He led some kind of protests. I was a high schooler and only really cared about graduating at the top of my class, so the details of the things happening politically back then went over my head. Until the point where there were looting and destruction of properties, times were uncertain enough that we were sent home in the middle of the day in school. The image that will always stay in my mind representing 2009 was my mother picking me up from school, a hide and seek moment with the looters, barricading ourselves in her office, feverishly listening to the news on the radio. And then, when we took the chance to go home, coming face to face with a wave of people, it was like I was in a car crash all over again, sitting helplessly in the back seat, looking at that wave of destruction rushing towards us. We somehow made it home. The car was not unscathed, but we somehow made it home. And then the military sided with Andradville, and the coup succeeded. They put him at the head of a transitional government. We were in 2009. In 2013, finally, presidential elections were held. Note that he stayed in power for pretty much a whole presidential tenure anyway. The next elected president was a former partisan of Andradville, and his term of office will mostly see a further steady decline of the country. After 4 years of misery, the next presidential election brought in some high stakes. Andradville and the former president he had ousted would finally legally duke it out. The better one of them would be chosen by the people. And Andradville really wanted and needed that putschist tag to be taken off of him. Surprise or not, he did win that election, so he became the president. Those who are not happy would just have to deal with it. This is democracy. At the beginning of his term of office, hopes were high. He seems to be actually trying to do something. Maybe Madagascar would actually get out of the mire. But after many pretty speeches, empty promises, well, it was not looking that good. Then the COVID pandemic hit. Well, it arrived a little more late on our shores, but it still did its thing. Meanwhile, Andradville was busy marketing a product made from an endemic plant. He really wanted to be seen as some kind of hero. The first president to ever do something like this or like that, to put Madagascar in history. Well, I guess in some way he did, but not in a way that he expected. At the end of his first tenure, the results were not as glowing as he would have wanted people to believe. And during the next presidential election, when he was a candidate at his own succession, a big scandal exploded. It turned out that he had asked for and was given French nationality. For those who do not know, Madagascar is a former French colony. We only were given our independence back in 1960. And if you ask for a different nationality, you essentially forfeit your Malagasy nationality. And obviously, someone who is not of Malagasy nationality cannot present themselves to its presidency. Or at least, that's what common sense dictates. That's what laws dictates. His partisans fell over themselves to try to defend him with ever contradictory declarations, and somehow the High Court just decided to give him back his nationality. And whatever, he was still a candidate for the presidential election. And then he was quote unquote re elected as president, not without the lowest recorded turnout in history for presidential election in this country, despite many reports about the electoral list having many names of people that shouldn't have been there, dead ones, ones that had left the country, and so on and so forth. He won. Yep. During this new tenure, his hero complex and paranoia are gonna reach new heights. He's gonna multiply the construction of many facilities that arguably should not have been the priority at that point, like restaurant in the middle of nowhere or cable cars, just to be able to say he was the first one who ever did it in the country. He will even install a spy software in state offices to make sure he could catch whoever was saying bad things about him. He tried to find ways to limit access to internet because people were flaming him on Facebook, and personalities that were critical to him started to be sent to jail for flimsy reasons. Things have been going worse than worse. Frequent power outages, to the point where children are celebrating when electricity returns. Many neighborhoods have maybe less than 6 hours of electricity per day. There have been cases of food poisoning because the food just spoils in the absence of refrigeration. People have been very patient. Malagasy culture values keeping the peace with each other above everything else. And the events of 2009 were still fresh in many minds. Many lives had been destroyed because of that. And many protests in Malagasy history had not led to a better future. But no patience is infinite. People were fed up. So, fast forward in September 2025. While the president was making pretty speeches in New York talking about how he had made leaps and bounds for the progress of Madagascar, Malagasy people took to the streets with handwritten signs to protest the blatant lack of electricity and water, to have solutions, concrete solutions to those problems that were simply making living a hell. They were met with an inappropriate amount of violence from the forces sent to keep an eye on them. And then, later that day, looting and destruction of properties occurred. For those who had seen it, it was very familiar. It was another tactic of diversion. Only, we were no longer in 2009 when information could be cut off by burning down some TV stations. People recorded many videos of those lootings and instances of some military policemen taking part in the looting themselves or just watching from afar. Insecurity was on the rise and people had to organize themselves by neighborhoods to have some kind of militia because the forces couldn't be relied on, or at least part of them. The protesters rightfully condemned the violence and asked for the president's public apology and an immediate dissolution of the government, among other things. Instead, there was no public apology and more empty promises. Oh, we are going to receive more generators to help with this whole electricity issue. It was like a house was on fire. They were asking him to help extinguish that fire. But instead, he made promises about building a house maybe in 15 years and never addressing the fire. The protesters' demands started out honestly very gentle and reasonable. But the other side was deaf and stupid. So the protesters finally asked for the president's resignation. After 16 years of patience and misery, it turned into a popular uprising. Many more people bloated the ranks of the protesters every day. And meanwhile, the president was still making empty promises about irrelevant things, trying to make himself look better in the eyes of the international community, whose eyes were finally starting to see us. Reports on the number of deaths and injuries during those protests were downplayed, and never once was responsibility taken. 3 weeks after the bloody day that ignited it all, some parts of the military decided to side with the people. Andrade was exfiltrated, reportedly by the French military. He fled, like the coward he was, and the presidency was vacant. So the parliament voted his impediment, and the military who sided with the people took over temporarily. Plans were made about making a mixed military-civil transitionary government with representatives from all the relevant parties in Madagascar to organize a presidential election, and well, from there we'll see how it goes. I personally liked the fact that they are not rushing into anything yet, because corruption in this country runs really deep. The latest presidential election to me was just pure scam. So it's a good thing that they want to redo the whole election committee and redo the whole electoral lists to make sure no more frauds are gonna happen. Will things be better immediately? Of course not. But a big step was taken. And as someone who had given up hope on my beloved country, I find myself actually hopeful for the first time in 16 years, which is a lot. 16 years is pretty much something like half of my life. And I cannot imagine how it is for the younger generation that has known only this for most of their lives. We're in for an uphill battle, that's for sure. But at the very least, I'm confident in the knowledge and the assurance that what you do really does return to you. And justice does exist in this world. We had a would-be tyrant here for so long. We've been so patient, gave him so much chances to do better, and he never. And he was dealt the same hand he dealt someone else before. It's beautiful. But also seeing the many misleading titles of pieces of news about my country, I am once again reminded that we are insignificant pawns in the hands of the bigger powers to be in this world. Whatever, everyone will get their comeuppance, one way or another. Anyway, that's about what I've been wanting to share. Again, it was my POV as a random Malagasy person living and breathing in this country. I hope that this little account has given you a bit more perspective about what has been happening. And yeah, do take care of yourselves. Thank you so much for watching. And I hope to see you again, maybe. Yeah, take care of yourselves.